could have given up, but you didn't. You could have stopped believing, but you didn't. You could have kept living their expectations, but you decided to make this life your own. And in turn, you're here. Hello everyone, today we're meeting Marsha Vanwynsberghe. She's an NLP trainer, an author, a podcast host, also a publisher and a speaker. Hello Marsha, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, hello, Anna. I'm just thrilled to be here.
Yes, thank you. So let's start a conversation with diving into your journey of becoming the person you are today. So tell us about, the turning point that happened for you, and how did you realize that this is something you want to do?
Okay, so turning point it's a great question. I had multiple turning points in my journey. And I was a parent who, about a decade ago, we started to deal with teen substance abuse. I found myself getting super small. Shame was driving the wheel. I was not living my best life. And over a number of years of trying to fix, manage, control, change everyone, I finally got to the point of recognizing that I had to lead myself. I had to take care of myself first. And that's when a lot of things started to change. But there was a really big turning point, one in particular, when I was working with the schools, we were having conversations. As much as I didn't want to deal with the average person because we were really struggling with it, with this difficult story, I still was out there trying to find solutions. I was, in groups, in parent groups, in a number of different counseling things, trying to find a way to navigate through this. And during those years, I had a number of times I was asked to speak in small groups. And when it was nerve-wracking because it's like, I don't want to stand up and share. But at the same time, I was like, well, maybe I could help somebody else. Like maybe we could, because when we're dealing with these difficult stories, the reason we feel so alone is because we don't talk about them, right? We make them bigger, we make it harder. And so through that process of sharing on very small groups with a couple of parents, I actually got a phone call from our CBC radio, and they asked if they could do an interview. And so we started to do the interview on a Thursday, and we got about 5 minutes into it. And he said, you know what, never mind. Can you come to the studio tomorrow morning? We're going to do it live. And so I'm thinking in my head, nobody really listens to CBC radio, so I'm fine, right? That's not a big deal. And I went in and I did the interview, and I think I was able to talk about a really difficult story, but not come across as angry, blaming others, just awareness. I wanted to bring awareness to a difficult topic. And when that interview was done, I walked out, my phone absolutely blew up. And that was the moment that I went, okay, well, the world officially knows now, so I don't have to hide. And it was actually easier in a sense because it was like, here we are, this is our story, and I think I'm supposed to talk about it. And so I started from there to really speak in larger groups and on larger stages, and then writing, collaborative chapters and etc. So it grew in a very unique way, but I would say that was a really big turning point of recognizing that I could take a very difficult story and do something really good with it.
Right. Yeah, and always in our stories, I know it's difficult because we have a certain emotion connected to that story. And whenever we start thinking about it, we kind of like reliving that past in a way. And it's hard for us to speak up. And we also think we're the only ones going through this. And we don't see the connection to other people. And we feel like isolated in that our story. But like you said, once we start speaking up and sharing with others, we see how people, they just they feel your pain, they feel what you're going through, they compassionate, and with you being feeling safe space where you can just say whatever is on your mind and nobody will judge you for it. it kind of like releases that weight from your chest, that stress that you've been putting upon yourself was just, with that kind of like negativity around the story. But once you start seeing it from another angle, you could see light in that story too, how you can impact others. There is another side of it usually. Don't you think so?
Oh, I do. And I absolutely love how you said that. I really do, because that's essentially what happened is we had spent so long hiding in this story. In the sense, it was just really more out of protection, in all fairness, to say it that way, because we're trying to navigate a really difficult situation. There's no room at that point. And, I don't think people have boundaries until you need to have boundaries. Like, you don't put boundaries in place until you actually have a need to have boundaries. And during those years, it was self-preservation. My husband and I were trying to figure out, how are we going to survive in this? And, what can we do? But when I got to a space of starting to share, two things happened. I started to go through a process of healing that I wasn't expecting. And it was like, oh, this is actually helping me to be able to let go of some of the guilt and the shame and the hurt and all of these things. And at the same time, hearing other people continuously say, that's my story, and I've never told a soul. It blew me away in the beginning, Anna. I cannot tell you how many people would stop and say, I've never told anyone, not my immediate family. And like, we've got people holding on to shame stories for decades because they think they're the only person in the world who has experienced this. And so what happened is I started to heal. But I'll tell you, when they started to share stories with me, it was fuel. I was like, oh, wow, this is not okay. This is not okay that we have so many people in these situations who won't talk about these stories because we're so afraid of how we will be seen, how we will look, and what people will think of us.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately when we are worried about other people's opinions of us. Sometimes, we just create it as another story, like an illusion in our mind that somebody will judge us, where in fact, maybe, it's not even happening. In most cases, it's not, and we just, with creating another story, we are putting ourselves down and kind of like stopping from sharing with others, thinking about something that might not be true.
And I do believe the judgment is there. I think it's actually something that all of us do, even if we don't mean to. It's something that we do. And when it comes to judgment, if I can share with your listeners, there was one point for me that I had a very close friend come to my door, literally yell at me for not fixing the situation. I mean, this was a close friend. This is not and when I said to her, I'm doing everything I can, like, this is just out of my control right now. And because it was a bit of a perfect storm situation. And I remember she started to cry and she said, it's so hard to be your friend because it's so hard to know what to say to you. And I just went, you know what? I'm going to do you a favor and we're going to part ways. Because the reason I share that story, and it is really important, is that when I heard her coming to my door saying negative things and difficult things about me, there was a light bulb moment, another turning point, but a light bulb moment where I sat there and went, you know what? I'm so worried about what everyone else is saying, but some of the worst words I'm hearing right now, I've already said them to myself. Like, who is actually judging me? Who is actually being the most critical of me? And it was me. And as soon as I started to recognize that, I went, okay, stop putting so much stock in what everyone else is saying about you, because you're the one walking in your shoes every single day, and you are by far your biggest critic. And that was such an eye opener. And I have looked at judgment of others differently from that day forward.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And actually, like you mentioned, we are more critical of ourselves than other people of us. But yet we are seeing that as, like you mentioned with your friend, you see that confrontation and that negative energy coming from another person, but yet you didn't see that within yourself, and it
No.
could be even worse than that. And when you
Always
start
worse.
recognizing and catching yourself in that type of thinking and realizing how you can stop doing that to yourself, you're the one in charge.
Mhm.
And with that, it's really like a turning point to realize, to be aware of how we talk to ourselves. And usually it happens on a daily basis and we don't realize that.
Well, and that's where some of the NLP work started to come in, is recognizing like the power of our thoughts. And we're having, upwards of, I think it's 60,000 thoughts a day. And of those, we repeat 80% of those. Of those, 90% are negative. Like we are by far putting ourselves on a loop of repeat negative thoughts and beliefs every single day. And when I started to really understand that, it was like, okay, it doesn't really matter what anyone else is saying, because I am the one who is completely blocking myself from creating change. And it's a really powerful thing when you start to go through it and release that, because I would say the number one thing I hear from people is they're constantly afraid of, what are they going to say? How is it going to look? How are people going to perceive me? How are people going to judge us? And it's like, that's all external. That's all, every single thing about that is external thought. And if we spend our life literally like focused on the external thoughts, we are chasing our worth all of our lives. Is all we're doing, is we're chasing it. It's got to come from inside. It has to.
Right. We're always trying to prove ourselves being worthy for, anything that we're trying to establish in terms of like career, or, I don't know, being a good mother, good friend, anything that you would think of. And we want to see that validation coming from somebody else. But
Yeah.
how about we, just have that within ourselves and know that we're enough? And we don't need to hear other people's opinions. The most important one is the one that I have about myself, and that matters. And that should be a priority.
It 100% should be. And I'm going to say that for majority of people, it isn't. I don't think I was the only one in that situation. And I know it is something that I hear from most people in my DMs or from clients, is that's the number one concern, is everyone else. What are they thinking or saying about me?
Wow. Yeah. And if you just think about how much time we're spending thinking about that, and how productive it would be if we just focus that energy into something more constructive and creative, and release that stress, because it actually adds up additional layers of stress when you're like anxious, nervous, and always, afraid. Living in that constant flight or fight response with all those, negative thoughts come and rushing at your mind, and you can't just be living, every single day on the loop, listening to the same type of story. You have to find a way to disrupt that cycle. And again, like, it starts with self-awareness. I would like to see your advice on how can we cultivate that skill. How can we integrate those practices in our daily habits to start with mindfulness? So, because this is like the foundation of releasing those type of negative thoughts.
Oh, absolutely. It's a great question. I think it comes down to, in the very beginning, like we always hear, we start with awareness, and awareness is, we can't change anything we're not aware of. But if we are aware of something, it's so important that the very next thing that we do is not shame or judge ourselves. So if you catch yourself in a loop of something that you've done over and over, your next thought can't be, I can't believe you're doing this again. Like, I can't believe you said this was important and this is how you're behaving. Because the second you shame yourself, you're literally keeping yourself stuck in that spot. So it's really important that you find a way to have awareness with no judgment. And so for myself, not in a self-deprecating way, but in a way, I had to add humor. I literally had to add humor. And I'm like, wow, Marsha, that took 5 minutes to go right back to where you were. And because you have to catch yourself, like even as making it as simple as you hear a lot of therapists will sometimes use like elastic on your wrist. You need to disrupt the pattern. You have to break the pattern and be able to catch it and break it into something different. So that's the first thing, is awareness. Second thing is that the more conscious you can become of your thoughts that you're having, then the more you can start to consciously look and think, like, is that actually how I want to believe? Is that actually true? Do I want to think that way? Do I want to be my biggest critic? Do I want to be tearing myself up? But no, I don't. I don't want to do that. That's not how I want to do it. And when I started that practice, the other thing, I would catch myself and think, all right, would I let anyone else talk to me this way? Because that's a big no. Like that's a big no. I'm a bit feisty as a person as it is. And if somebody ever spoke to me the way that I was speaking to myself, I would have something to say, or I would turn and walk away. So if I wouldn't let anyone else talk to me the way that I was speaking to myself, why would I do it with myself? And so those first three things are important, is catching that behavior in order to change it. And then you can start the practice. A lot of people will say, and this is just my opinion, write the affirmations and say it and do it. But I can write it. I can surround my entire room in sticky notes with all of the I am worthy. If I don't actually believe it, they don't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. And it's not about how often I say the affirmations or the energy I put into it. I have to connect it to an emotion. So if you want to change a thought, you have to connect it to an emotion. So for me, in a very simple example, I was in the train of thought that burnout was like a badge of honor. That meant I worked hard. That meant that I was doing a lot. And when I would repeat that cycle, I would get frustrated with burnout. And I would think, why are you constantly in this space? Meanwhile, I'm probably doing twice as much as what, and it was still never enough. At the core root of that, at the core root of a lot of our limiting beliefs, is the belief that we're not worthy, is the belief that we are not capable of it. So if you take that, everybody has something that they repeat on a regular basis in their own train of thought, in their own language, in their words. So for me, it was burnout. And instead, I started to get curious. I always encourage you to get curious and think and write and speak. What would it feel like if I build a business that isn't about burnout? What would it feel like if I built a business, if I had a life that prioritized time and family and relationships, my health? What would that feel like? And you start to bring emotions to it. So then I rewrote my thought, my limiting belief thought, in a different way. And instead, I wrote it that the more I rest, the more I play, the more I earn, my desires are met with ease and grace. And that might sound really silly to someone else, but for me, it brought up a lot of emotion. So every time I would catch myself in a space of like, okay, no, you have to work hard in order to make anything happen. And yes, I believe everything requires hard work. I was taking it to an extreme, trust me. And so in that space, I now prioritize rest. I do other things that support that new belief. And it's been the last 3 years consistently saying, no, that's old me. I don't do that and push to burnout. I do aligned work. I work hard in pockets of time, but I also prioritize my health and, my rest. So if you're listening to this, to sum that up, what I would say to do is be aware of the thought that you want to change. We all have them. You have a bazillion of them. But what is the one that's not serving you? Because our thoughts are only ever replaying the past or creating the future. That's all they're doing. So ask yourself, is that thought supporting you? Find a way to build awareness, to catch yourself when you're doing it. Write it down, what the thought is. Work to write it in a new, empowering way, and surround yourself with that and be that version. Because eventually what's going to happen is that you start to change those thoughts and beliefs. And for sometimes it can be very beneficial when it comes to NLP work to be able to do other techniques, which can help you to change the root of that limiting belief. But those are some of the practices that I would recommend.
Yeah, and those are very beneficial for every one of us. I would suggest usually like a journaling or some kind of notebook to have around, or even like sticky notes, anything that you would actually see it on a piece of paper. And I've noticed for myself too, sometimes if, something is kind of bothering me, if I just write it down and I look at it, like I'm looking at it from a different angle, I would say, different perspective, even though I just put it on the paper, but something happens and then you see it for what it is. And usually it sometimes doesn't even make sense. And you like read it again and you see how less of a power it takes over you. You realize that this was just a misconception. Maybe it was some kind of thought that I acquired a long time ago. It served me at some point, but now I realized that it's not even true, and maybe it was just at some point I acquired, but it doesn't make sense now. Pretty much it's not serving me now, so now I can release it. And with my realization that it's not serving me, it's easy for me to let it go. And like you said, rewrite it in a way that will serve me, so I could just flip it around and see what if the opposite is true. It has the same chance to be true as this statement, right? So I'll try another statement that would work better for me, and like you said, connected to emotion, start feeling as if it's happening now and I already have it, right? And it's eventually you see yourself changing, but you have to repeat and you have to kind of like leave it, I would say.
Oh, I love exactly everything you said. And I couldn't agree more. People will ask me and say, do I have to do this practice every day? I go back to it and I'm like, well, do you think every day? Because if you think every day and you've had, decades to hold on to some of these beliefs that are not serving you, because most of those beliefs were created before the age of 8 years old. And so it does take a tremendous amount of practice. And to take it back to what you just said there, and I love, is a sense, I always say, write it down, because thoughts in our head actually can be quite toxic. But when you put them down on paper, they lose their power, because you'll look at it and go, I don't actually believe that. Like, that's actually not true, or that's not what I want to believe. So it changes perspective again. It's another way to do it. I think journaling and brain dumping and allowing those thoughts to come out is a very powerful way to start to choose a different thought.
Definitely. And also you mentioned how we can kind of allow ourselves to write our own story the way we want it. And we should be kind of aware that we are responsible of creating our own life and experiences. And with that comes, us being able to see it for ourselves and be clear on what we actually want. Sometimes like people very general in what they want, but the more specific, I feel like the better it is, because then you can tie it more to the emotion, and how you can kind of like feel it into existence in a way.
Everything you can tie to emotion, you will start to bring it to life. You absolutely will. And what you said there, I think, is really powerful, because it's important that you recognize, what is it that you want? Like, what is it that means to success for you? So, for example, you might find yourself in a state of jealousy or comparison for someone else, for what they're doing, what they're creating. They bought the big house, they do these things, whatever that is. Ask yourself, like, but do I want that? Like, do I actually want it? Because if you don't want it, then who cares what they're doing? It doesn't matter. Bring it back to what is important to you, and bring it back to your emotion, not what you think is important to other people. Again, no external validation, go back to internal and what is important. And I think this is just a funny example, but it was just my birthday, and we had all these little things planned. And my husband was like, so what would you like for a gift? I'm like, time. And he's like, so what do I do with that? You want to watch? What do you want? I'm like, no, time is important to me. And so I want to, can we organize to do something like, and spend the day, take a day off of work and spend the day? Yeah, that would, like, you sure that's all you want? I'm like, but that's what's important to me. So I think it's very important that you're always coming back to, what is it that is driving me? What is important to me? Because if I give him an idea as a gift, just because, well, at least he can get me something and he'll feel better, but that's actually not what's important to me, now we're back to the same loop again. So I think it's super important to really understand like who we are at the core, what matters to us, and then feel worthy enough to ask for what we want and be able to be in that space and in that energy. And that has just, it's really started to change a lot of how I see myself, how I value myself now, because I ask for what I want instead of trying to please others.
Yeah, and a lot of people struggle with people pleasing and comparing themselves and try and, like, again, find that external validation from outside. And the more we chase, around other people, it's just never going to end. And we are going to feel more anxious, exhausted, stressed. And again, we're going to just feed that cycle with us choosing to do that. And again, I'm saying it's a choice because we're the ones responsible and we can change it, but it still has to come from your awareness of catching yourself, kind of like comparing yourself. Try to look more into what you want, what is important for you, what's your passion, what's your goal in life, and focus on that. And try to create something of your own. And again, like, know you are worthy by just being here. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone, and that's your birthright, and you are a unique individual with unique gifts, talents, and you have your own way of expressing yourself. So I would rather focus on being me authentically rather than comparing myself or trying to play a role, living some other life. I would just be more happy being myself here right now and being present in this moment. And that's where I think people start feeling better and, already knowing what they want and asking for what they really want in this life and what will bring them joy and fulfillment. And that's where it starts, kind of like showing what life is all about. And we will get to that place where we start feeling happy and, and everything just fall into place.
It does. It definitely does over time. And I love how you said that. And the one thing that I use for myself too is this fact that if you feel like you have to prove something, like when you're in a space of proving something, you're not approving of who you are. And that was a big thing for me because I was always proving. I was always out proving. And who am I proving it to? Like literally, who am I proving it to? It's again, that little bit of a lack of worth underneath that story. So if you catch yourself, that's an easy trap for me. If I catch myself in a space of proving, it's like, oh, no, this is old. This is old Marsha. We don't do this now. And so it's really, you can change those thoughts, and it might feel like a lot of work in the beginning, but the more consistent you are with it, just say it out loud, look at it and say, like, is this actually what I want to create? Is this actually how I want to live? Is this actually true? And when you start to see it and recognize it and practice rewriting it, you will start to change it. It takes time. It does. But with practice, you'll be able to catch it a lot faster and change it a lot faster.
Right. And we have to practice, like you said, consistently. And I would say even on a daily basis, because again, it's something that's running on the background and we don't realize how it's creating our life for us. And if we are not satisfied with what we have right now, and we're the one creating that, then we have the power to change it. So with us dedicating that time, investing in ourselves, that's the best way to kind of start living a new life that we want. So we have to be willing to do the work, and that requires us maybe to feel uncomfortable sometimes, even because this is something new. Again, we are familiar with what's been, all these years, and we feel comfortable in that. And once it's required change, it's usually, people start kind of telling themselves excuses why would they not do the work, like starting to procrastinate or delaying things. But then, like, again, you have to catch yourself in that too and start being more, I would say, disciplined, and put those structure in place, knowing that this is how I'm going to behave now and I'm in control. So once, I guess it takes practice, it takes time, but we have to be willing to kind of like be committed into that path of change, and also realize that it will take time. It won't be overnight, because a lot of times we see like people looking for easy fix, and it's also sometimes discouraging to not see the result right away. But we have to know that it requires time. But eventually, when we're listening to other people's stories, we know it's possible for us too. So we don't have to be jealous, but rather see it as our own opportunity to change.
Oh, 100%. If you see something in someone else and it sparks something in you, and you immediately think that, but I'm not worthy, I can't do it like she did. The fact that you see it in someone else means it's available within you. It's available within you. You have to work to find a way to let it come to the surface and to practice and do it, but it is available in you. And every time, if I feel myself in a space of like triggered, I like to use the word expanded, because there are people that are expanding me every single day. Like they're expanding me with what's possible. And they're just showing something that's available within me. I just haven't found ways to tap into it yet. And this is where languaging is so important, because if you haven't hit a goal, always finishing with the word yet, right? Like it's just not here yet. And when you're talking about having to change and practice this every single day, it might be hundreds of times an hour in the beginning. It is such a foreign concept, but eventually it will get easier. And when you start to do that, again, always knowing that your thoughts are coming from, like, your thoughts are creating your words, and your words are creating your beliefs, and your beliefs are creating your actions, and your actions are creating your results. So if those thoughts, ask yourself, like, are they the thoughts that will create the life that you say you want? Because if they're not, then you can make the prettiest vision board. You can write out all your goals. You can do all of those things. If at the core, your thoughts are, I don't want to say garbage, but if your thoughts are, if they're not very positive and they're not really reinforcing where you want to go, none of the external stuff is going to matter, because you're just going to keep putting a new vision board up and writing new goals, but you don't believe that you can create it or that you are worthy of doing it. So again, back to what you said in the very beginning, it always starts internal first.
Yeah. And that belief that you really see yourself achieving that goal, that you really feel that you're worthy of having what you want, that's very, like, that's a foundation for you to even have it. If you don't believe in that, and like you said, in order to have belief, you have to have constant thoughts about it, because that's what will create that belief. And without having that belief, nothing will work externally. So that should come within. And with that kind of like engine running and fueling the motivation inside of you, that's what will keep you moving and making actions towards achieving that goal, right? So it's kind of like connected to every single thing to each other, because this is what we start with. We have to first find the thought that will benefit us, that will bring us the result that we want in the end. So that's just life changing, and every single one of us can do that, because like we just spoke about other people's stories, and if they shown us an example of what's possible, we just need to realize that we can do that ourselves too, but we need to see what is the path to getting there. And again, with us dedicating time to practice certain thoughts and creating that life for ourselves, that's where we should focus on, without being jealous of that person, but rather find kind of lesson in that and see for ourselves that it's possible.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I really couldn't. And I think it's when it comes down to it, it is just giving yourself some grace. It takes lots of practice, and being able to just recognize, like, if you're listening to this and you're a person who's stuck in a really difficult story, which is what we were at that time, everybody was talking about, think positive thoughts, write your gratitudes, etc. I get it, but when you're living in a really difficult situation, it's hard to figure out how to do that. And I would still be very conscious of what your language is. So I was using the word stuck constantly. I felt stuck. I felt stuck in every single aspect of my life. I was raising minors. We were dealing with a horrific situation. I felt stuck. We didn't have a lot of support. I felt stuck. And before I knew it, I was literally saying the word stuck hundreds of times an hour. Well, how did I feel? Very stuck. Very stuck. And I had to get to a point of recognizing, like, that word was like a cancer in my brain. Every time I'd say stuck, and it's like, nope, can't say stuck. And I would just have to change that. I did the same thing with the word why, which was where my book came in, because my book is called, like, When She Stopped Asking Why, because the word why, in the context, if you're using why as what you're working towards, it's like a goal. It's an anchor as to why you're doing it. But for me, it wasn't. It was like, why is this happening to me? Why is this? Those are victim questions. So saying I was stuck and calling and asking the questions why all day long only kept me feeling like I was more stuck. And so it's really powerful to recognize, like, what words are you using on a regular basis that are not allowing you to move forward?
Yeah, definitely. And also, like you mentioned, if you look at those thoughts as if somebody told you that, another person would tell you the same type of talk that you're telling yourself, would you accept that? Or you would think it's not acceptable, or you would rather, you would put a boundary right away? If the answer is yes, that means there is something wrong about what you're saying, right? And usually we don't see it when it's running, with us not speaking out loud, but it's just us listening to that talk. But once we start seeing it from another perspective, we again see for what it is and how harsh we are on ourselves. And again, with us putting that on paper, we can also catch that. So we need to find a way to get it out, either to speak, to write, to do something about it. The more we keep it down, the more we're hiding, the more it's eating us alive and not giving us space to grow.
Yes, 100% on every single thing you said. It is definitely practice. And I just want anyone who's listening to know, like, you can make massive changes in your life by doing some of these practices that we're sharing. Because if you would have told me that things would have changed years ago, I would have never believed it. I just wasn't there that was something that I believed is possible. But with consistent practice and working on those skills, you eventually start to stack your habits, right? You're stacking your habits, just like Atomic Habits, where he talks about, but you start to stack your wins. The time that it takes to catch yourself will just keep decreasing. You're going to get faster at it. You're going to hear it. You're going to hear it in other people. I started to hear other people saying, I'm like, but are you stuck though? Like, are you actually stuck? Like, you can hear it because this practice becomes so familiar to you. And for me, I believe this is one big way of how you start to rewrite and change a story, is recognizing what story are you telling yourself, calling it out, being very specific, and then asking yourself, is this the life I want to create? And if not, what can I do with that?
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, and with that comes, just I want us to think and our listeners to think how we can just rewrite our own life stories and we can start today. You don't have to achieve a certain goal first. You can start today with what you have. And wherever you at, you just need to start doing those practices little by little, like see how you're gonna get better at it, and you're gonna it will require less time over time once you do it, and it will become easier because again, you hear how other people went through this, you know that it's possible, and it's possible for you too. And all of us can just release what it's not serving us anymore and become just happier, more joyful people. And together we're going to establish better connection with each other, because I believe the more you know yourself, the better you connect with other people as well. And that's also an important way for you to build a meaningful relationship, because that will also translate in your personal and professional life. So you have to think how, with you prioritizing your health, you kind of like put in a foundation for a better life.
100%, 100%. You just, again, it's just those practices that you start to do every day, they will add up in the most incredible ways.
Yes. All right. I'm so glad we had a conversation today. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and wisdom. And for those who would like to connect with you, how they can find you?
I have made it very easy because of a very long last name. So everywhere on social media or my website, it's all Marsha Van W. So VANW, Marsha Van W. If you start typing that, if you went to Google, everything in Google, when you start typing Marsha Van W, almost all of it comes up as me, which makes it very easy, which is awesome. And my podcast is called Own Your Choices, Own Your Life, because that's actually what I truly believe, that when you take full responsibility for your choices, that's when you can create change in your life.
Yes. I'm also going to add it in the episode description as well. And again, thank you so much for having that conversation with me. And I hope you enjoy your day.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Anna.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, hit the subscribe button and share it with others. Stay tuned.